Number 9. The wreck that swallows deep-sea divers. Built during the early 1950s, the Italian ocean liner SS Andrea Doria operated out of Genoa as a luxury cruise ship. It advertised itself as the country's largest, fastest, and safest passenger vessel at the time. It even had a reputation for being unsinkable, despite lacking the fame of the Titanic. Just 3.5 years after entering service, the Andrea Doria collided with the Swedish-built ocean liner Stockholm off the Nantucket coast amid heavy fog. The ship slowly began to tilt on its side as it took on water, taking 11 hours to completely disappear below the surface. It came to rest along the border of the continental shelf at a depth of 240 feet. While 46 people tragically perished in the disaster, 1,600 people survived thanks to the Andrea Doria's slow sinking. Rumored to contain a large amount of money and valuables, the wreck is alluring to deep-sea divers who visit the wreck despite the alarming number of explorers who have died during past dives. As of 2017, at least 16 people have lost their lives trying to gain a peek at the Andrea Doria, including expert divers. In 2015, 60-year-old scuba diver Thomas Pritchard vanished during a dive to the luxury ship. He was never found and is presumed dead. 2 years later, one of Britain's top divers, 46-year-old Stephen Slater, was pulled unresponsive from the water and later died. The deaths have been attributed to numerous causes, including the strain that the water's pressure and cold temperature put on the body. Rising to the surface too quickly can cause a deadly condition known as the bends, and at such extreme depth, an equipment malfunction can easily prove deadly. It's also speculated that some divers become disoriented inside the wreck, where visibility is poor and currents can change with little to no warning. Yet the Andrea Doria continues to draw visitors from the diving world who want to say they've been there. Bonus if they manage to retrieve an artifact as proof. Number 8. Mystery plane debris. While sailing off the St. Augustine, Florida coast in 2012 with plans to take photos of reefs for an interactive map he was creating, 31-year-old Joe Kistel's depth finder detected something strange. It was an object 80 feet below the surface. He dove to the site and observed metal parts and debris that he initially thought had perhaps fallen off a barge. They were actually plane parts, including 2 engines, an engine block, and a broken propeller. The wreckage may belong to an aircraft that disappeared 16 years earlier in 1996. 58-year-old Stuart Dunbar was flying his small plane alone from Georgia to his home in South Carolina when he put out a concerning distress call, saying that he was dizzy and having vision problems. He vanished along with the aircraft, leaving his family without answers. Dunbar's daughter, Penny Malfris, told CNN that she believes her father steered the plane away from land to avoid hurting anyone when he realized he was having an emergency. When some local fishermen heard about the discovery, they took Kistel to another site 4 miles away where he found another aircraft. He broke off a piece of debris only to later notice it had "Property of the U.S." written on it, indicating that it was a military aircraft. It also contained numbers that helped Kistel's team identify the plane as an A-7 last flown by a pilot named Robert Bessel. As it turned out, Bessel was still alive. He was 24-year-old when he became disoriented and hit the fuselage of his commander's plane during a training flight in the 1970s. Bessel told StAugustine.com that the plane lost power and flew out of control. He ejected and was rescued from the water, but said he wasn't exactly proud of the mishap and didn't want to talk about it much. In fact, he never told a lot of people about the accident, period. After Kistel rediscovered the aircraft, Bessel decided to finally face the part of his past that he had tried for so long to forget about. He visited the wreck site, and it seemed to help him finally come to terms with what happened. At number 7, Disney Island's mildly creepy relics. Disney Cruise Line passengers get the privilege of visiting the company's privately owned island in the Bahamas known as Castaway Cay. It's home to a 22-acre snorkeling lagoon filled with scattered relics, including a ship anchor, a sunken submarine, a fishing boat, Disney character statues, and a bizarre-looking structure that nobody seems to be able to identify. In one Reddit discussion about the mysterious round object, which appears to have a protruding barrel, some commenters pointed out that it seems to resemble a replica of a naval mine. These self-contained explosive devices have a history of dating back centuries. The first known precursors to modern sea mines were described by Chinese inventors during the Ming Dynasty. The most common used variant of the weapon used today is known as a contact mine, which requires the enemy to come into contact with it before it explodes. Luckily, the one at the Castaway Cay is only there for show. In 2021, the island reopened for the first time in a year after being closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Return visitors who swam in the snorkeling lagoon before the coronavirus noticed a handful of new additions to its collection of items, including some described by visitors as mildly creepy. Have you ever been to Disney's private island? Let us know in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. At number 6, unidentified Hawaiian wreck. In 2005, researchers discovered a 19th century wooden ship at French Frigate Shoals in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. 2 years later, in 2007, a team of scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration visited the wreck in hopes of identifying it. Based on the ship's features, they concluded that it's most likely the Churchill, a four-masted schooner that ran aground on a reef in 1917 while sailing from Tonga to Seattle. The wreck's size and dimensions were also consistent with the 178-foot-long ship. Built in North Bend, Oregon in 1900, the 600-ton Churchill's design was typical of the large wooden schooners that dominated American shipping in the Pacific between the Civil War and World War I. When it ran aground, it was carrying a cargo of copra, or dried coconut meat. Luckily, all 12 crew members were rescued by a nearby fishing boat. They accused the captain, Charles Granzow, of deliberately destroying the ship, and he was charged with espionage. The disgruntled sailors claimed that Granzow wanted to remain aboard the Churchill even after it was apparent they would only survive if they got into lifeboats. It's unclear what became of the matter. After exploring the wreck, the NOAA marine archaeologists admitted that they can't say with certainty that it's the Churchill, but all signs point toward it. Number 5. The Holy Grail of Shipwrecks. While exploring off the waters of Bulgaria in 2018, scientists from the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project spotted a shockingly intact shipwreck. It stood out among the 60 or so others that they saw of how incredibly well preserved it was. It sits over a mile below the surface, where there's very little oxygen in the water. Decay happens much more slowly, which explains why the 2,400-year-old ship is in such great condition. It's not the oldest submerged vessel in the region, but it's the only known ship of its age that contains a preserved mast, rowing benches, and other features that are not normally seen in wrecks from that time period. The ancient boat resembles the vessels seen in Greek artwork, offering a hint about its possible origins. A portion of the wreck was raised and radiocarbon dated to the 5th century BC, when Greek city-states and Mediterranean colonies frequently traded along the Black Sea coast. While little is known about the ship itself, its pristine state is giving experts an unprecedented glimpse back in time as they try to learn more. Number 4. Exploded warship. Sitting at a depth of 361 feet in the Aegean Sea, an old ship bears evidence that it was blown up before it sank to its watery grave. The 130-foot-long vessel's bow is missing and its stern has collapsed. Shredded metal sheets were ejected from the sides of the ship, and the seafloor is scattered with debris as far as 100 feet away from the main wreck. The ship was discovered by divers in 2022 near the Greek island of Kythnos. Its unique construction of closely spaced frame lines, no holds, and a low profile of just 10 feet in height bears elements of what expedition leader Kostas Thaktaradidis described as a very old ship, possibly a warship. The team that discovered the vessel declined to speculate on its age or who it belonged to. Aside from clear evidence that it was destroyed in a very strong explosion, its origins and story are a complete mystery. Kostas and his team hope to identify the ship through further research. At number 3, a mystery sloop in Lake Michigan. While searching Lake Michigan for the debris of a long-missing aircraft in 2004, a team of explorers from the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association and the National Underwater Marine Agency discovered the wreck of a small wooden boat 250 feet below the surface. They concluded that it's a 19th century single-masted merchant sloop measuring just 47 feet long and 17 feet wide. There are few recorded disappearances of sloops on Lake Michigan. The team noted that there are a few that were similar in size to the one they found, but the features were different. Based on records, the closest candidate for the wreck's identity is the Buffalo, a 49 by 16-foot passenger sloop that was built in Michigan in 1845. But there are no known records to suggest that the Buffalo was lost on Lake Michigan, throwing another wrench into the mystery. A document from 1850 shows that its owner surrendered it, but lacks any details about changes in the boat's ownership or name, or if it disappeared or wrecked, which would ordinarily be included on a surrender certificate. Researchers pointed out that record-keeping was a lot less thorough and accurate back then than it is now, so an absence of any record of the Buffalo sinking doesn't mean it didn't sink. But they also can't say with certainty that the submerged sloop is the Buffalo, and an educated guess may be the closest they ever get to knowing for sure. Number 2. Pearl Harbor Plane. During the first few minutes of the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Japanese forces bombed the naval air station on the east coast of Oahu, sending 27 Catalina PBY planes plunging into the Pacific Ocean. Only 11 PBYs survived the attack. Their destruction prevented American pilots at the station from immediately retaliating against the Japanese, amounting to a significant setback for U.S. forces that day. Researchers have long known about the presence of these destroyed long-range bombers, but have struggled to explore one particular wreck of a PBY-5 over the years. The coral-encrusted aircraft sits at a depth of just 30 feet in Kaneohe Bay, but divers encountered murky waters when they tried to visit the site in 1994 and again in 2008. They finally managed to take some clear images of the wreck and perform an archaeological survey in 2021 thanks to opportune conditions and advanced equipment. The identity of the plane and its crew remain unknown, and experts have accepted that they may never have the answers. Because the wreck is protected under the Sunken Military Craft Act of 2004, it's illegal to move it to a place where it might be easier to study. But the pictures that were captured during the visit are giving researchers their first detailed glimpse of the plane, and it could help them learn more about what exactly happened that day. And at number 1, Yangtze River Shipwreck. China's Yangtze River is Asia's longest waterway, spanning a 3,900-mile distance from the Tibetan Plateau to the East China Sea. Its use as a major cargo and passenger route dates back hundreds of years, and it also played a vital role in warfare and the expansion of Imperial China. In 2015, researchers discovered a remarkably preserved ancient merchant ship resting beneath 18 feet of water at the bottom of the Yangtze River. They identified it as a vessel that sailed sometime between 1862 and 1875 during the Qing dynasty. Divers recovered a trove of artifacts including blue and white porcelain, purple clay pottery, and other cups, bowls, and plates bearing ornate designs and distinct coloring. Experts traced their origins to Vietnam and a city in Chinese Jiangxi province that was once known as the porcelain capital. The wreck was raised in 2022 after years of planning, revealing one of the country's largest and most intact wooden vessels ever found. Known simply as Yangtze Estuary No. 2, the ship measures 125 feet long and 32 feet wide, and has 31 cabins. To safely pull it out of the water, researchers built a watertight chamber and slowly lifted the ship, which took several hours. They found even more artifacts, including iron anchors, Vietnamese hookah tanks, and more exquisitely decorated dining ware. Efforts to fully explore and preserve the wreck are ongoing. 3. Bell Island Shipwrecks. Located south of Newfoundland in Conception Bay, Bell Island is a rugged landmass with a rich mining history dating back to the 19th century. It became one of the world's biggest iron ore producers, and its importance increased during World War II as a crucial contributor to the Allied war effort. German U-boats attacked Bell Island twice in 1942 and sank numerous vessels, leaving behind a multitude of shipwrecks that remain on the ocean floor to this day. The first attack began around noon on September 5th when U-boat 513 torpedoed the Canadian SS Lord Strathcona and the British SS Saganaga, both of which were fully loaded with a cargo of iron ore. It took just 3 minutes for the Saganaga to sink, taking 29 crew members with her. The Lord Strathcona also sank, but its crew had time to escape and there were no fatalities. After the first attack, the Canadian government installed additional searchlights and took some other measures to better protect the ships near its shoreline. 2 months later, at around 3 a.m., A U-boat torpedo narrowly missed the Greek coal freighter Anna T and struck a pier, causing a massive explosion that was so powerful it blasted the windows out of some of the island's homes. The U-boat then struck 2 ore-filled cargo ships in a passing convoy. 2 torpedoes slammed into the British SS Rose Castle, killing 24 crew members and sending the 459-foot ship to the bottom of the Atlantic. The crew initially survived the sinking, clinging desperately to debris in the frigid northern waters, but then a torpedo struck the British-owned Free French ship called the Paris-Lyon-Marseille 27. The explosive slipped beneath the waves in just 60 seconds, detonating underwater and claiming the lives of 12 men. Pierre Simard, an able-bodied seaman, described how the PLM-27 sank like a brick, giving their survivors no time to deploy lifeboats or help less fortunate crew members who were unable to escape. He swam for a half hour and collapsed from exhaustion as soon as he reached the shore. Remembered today as the Battle of Belle Island, the attacks claimed a total of 65 lives and the cost of Allies thousands of tons of valuable iron ore. To prevent history from repeating itself a third time, the Canadian government placed anti-submarine nets in Conception Bay. It proved to be an effective measure, and there were no more attacks in the area throughout the remainder of the war. All 4 wrecks are well preserved due to the dark, cold conditions they came to rest in. The shallowest among them is the PLM-27, which sits at a depth ranging from 50 to 100 feet. The deepest shipwreck belongs to the Rose Castle at 100 to 150 feet below the surface. It's known as the Jewel of Belle Island wrecks for its pristine condition as well as the growth of corals and other organisms that are seen less often on other ships. In 2019, the Canadian government recognized the Battle of Belle Island as a national historic event. An official memorial was constructed in 2022 along with an information panel describing the attacks that took place here, ensuring that this battle and the men who lost their lives as a result are never forgotten. 2. Villa Epecuén. Villa Epecuén, founded in Buenos Aires province, Argentina during the 1920s, was once a tourist village that drew visitors in with claims that their saltwater lake, Lago Epecuén, contained healing properties. At the time, the lake was the world's second saltiest body of water, with saline levels 10 times higher than any of the oceans. The village's tourism industry got its start with the help of an Englishman who leased a large portion of land and promoted the town's health benefits, even going as far as hiring scientists to support his claim. At its peak, Villa Epecuén had thousands of residents and could accommodate more than 5,000 visitors. It was home to 280 businesses including hotels, lodges, guest houses, and other establishments that catered to both the local and visiting populations. On November 6, 1985, following years of unusually heavy rains and consistently rising water levels, the lake breached a nearby dam that was built to protect Villa Epecuén from flooding. Residents awoke to find the village waterlogged, with levels ranging from ankle deep to 4 feet. Left with no other choice but to abandon their homes, the population packed what they could and fled to the nearby city of Carhué, hoping that the flooding was temporary and they'd be able to return soon enough. However, their hopes were dashed as the floodwaters continued to encroach on the deserted village, reaching a depth of 10 feet within 2 weeks of the initial breach. By 1993, Villa Epecuén was submerged in 33 feet of water. Decades of heavy rainfall were followed by years of light precipitation, and in 2009 the lake began to recede for the first time in decades. Buildings, cars, dead trees, and other fixtures began to appear, revealing the effects of prolonged saltwater exposure. Sections of the village are still underwater, leaving a partially submerged apocalyptic wasteland that continues to draw in tourists, but for vastly different reasons than health and rejuvenation. The re-emerging structures and vehicles are heavily corroded and caked in a thick layer of gray and white salt, making it clear that returning to Villa Epecuén was out of the question. For most people, at least. One former resident, 85-year-old Pablo Novak, moved back to the village in 2009, becoming its first resident in nearly 25 years. He took up residence in an abandoned house and is the only person to ever return to Villa Epecuén, where he takes care of his 2 cows and enjoys solitude. Even the senior citizen's wife chose not to follow him there. Novak's dust-covered home lacks electricity and is filled with rusting furniture and old calendars. He told CNN that he'd lost hope that the town would be rebuilt, but he chose to stay there anyway. The elderly gentleman, whose life is chronicled in the 2013 documentary called Pablo's Villa, spends his days wandering the empty streets and observing the crumbling ruins with a longing sense of nostalgia for its golden days. And he says that he's perfectly happy doing so. It's unclear whether the region is expected to experience another wet period that will once again cause the lake's waters to rise and resubmerge Villa Epecuén. But at the moment, there's no plans to rebuild, and the only thing that will continue to attract people to the village are its dilapidated remains. In some areas, all that's left of the buildings that once stood are collapsed piles of debris, or the occasional recognizable item like an old bathtub or bed frame. A staircase to nowhere marks where a beauty salon once stood, and old vehicles have been reduced to little more than decaying metal masses. However, some structures are identifiable, including a former slaughterhouse, a theater, and the headstones filling the town's cemetery. Would you ever decide to live in a completely abandoned village all by yourself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 1. The Graveyard of the Atlantic. The waters off North Carolina's Outer Banks are historically known as some of the most treacherous in the world, owing to the region's constantly shifting sands, unpredictable currents, and its positioning against the Gulf Stream current. One of the most infamous features of the Outer Banks is a cluster of shallow sandbars known as the Diamond Shoals. Extending for 8 miles off Cape Hatteras, the shoals are thought to be responsible for as many as 600 of the more than 5,000 recorded shipwrecks that have occurred in the region. For that reason, the area has since been nicknamed the Graveyard of the Atlantic. In addition to the dangerously shallow waters of the Outer Banks, the area is notorious for its severe storms, which often happen out of nowhere and have sent many ships to their watery graves since record-keeping began in 1526. One of the most famous shipwrecks to wreck in the Outer Banks was the Queen Anne's Revenge. It arrived at Beaufort Inlet in 1718 under the command of Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard the Pirate. The vessel ran aground on a sandbar, forcing the captain and his crew to transfer what they could of their supplies and spoils onto a smaller ship. Blackbeard abandoned Queen Anne's Revenge and dropped several of his crew members off on an island with no plans to return for them. In 1996, explorers rediscovered the pirate's flagship in 28 feet of water, roughly a mile from the coastal city of Atlantic Beach. Over 300,000 artifacts have been recovered from the wreck, including a bronze bell, navigational instruments, dinnerware, 30 cannons, and personal effects, such as clothing and jewelry. In 1750, 32 years after the sinking of Queen Anne's Revenge, a Spanish treasure ship called the El Salvador ran aground in the same area during a hurricane. According to historical records, the ship was badly destroyed and was left buried in several feet of sand. Only 4 crew members survived this tragic event. The El Salvador's cargo of gold and silver has never been recovered from the wreck and is at the center of a years-long court battle over who has the rights to the hoard. 2 of the 6 treasure-laden merchant ships that the vessel was traveling with also went down in the storm. Another one of the more well-known Outer Banks wrecks is the ironclad U.S. Navy warship USS Monitor. Commissioned by President Abraham Lincoln in 1862 in response to news that the Confederate military was building a similar type of ship, Monitor was built from start to finish in just 3 months. However, the 179-foot-long vessel's career was cut short not too long after entering service, when it encountered a brutal storm while being towed by a tugboat and sank 16 miles off Cape Hatteras. Some of the Graveyard of the Atlantic's wrecks are surprisingly close to the shore. In 1925, a 3-masted schooner called the Irma crashed into the beach at Kill Devil Hills while it was headed to Georgia with a load of timber. The Coast Guard rescued the crew, and the beach ship went on to function as a makeshift dance hall for the next 6 years before a storm finally began pulling it apart and sucking it back into the ocean. Since then, it occasionally reappears above the water. Just 600 feet off the coast of Kill Devil Hills are the remains of 2 ships that sank in the same spot 2 years apart from each other. One of the vessels is the Kaiser's, an American tanker that struck a sand reef in 1927. The other ship, a Swedish freighter called the Karl Gerhard, met the same fate in 1929 when it struck the Kaiser's, breaking the older wreck in half. Today they sit in just 20 feet of water. Conditions along the Outer Banks became even more perilous during World War II, when German U-boats laid siege to at least 400 merchant vessels in the region, ending the lives of more than 5,000 people. These attacks earned it the nickname of Torpedo Alley or Torpedo Junction. Most of the ships sank in 1942 during what the Nazis called the Second Happy Time. Just weeks into the period, the newly built British tanker SS Empire Gem and the American cargo steamer SS Venor were torpedoed off Diamond Shoals. All but 2 of the Empire Gem's 57-man crew died, and 17 of the Venor's sailors lost their lives as a result. A few months later, a 463-foot-long British tanker called the SS San Delfino was attacked off Cape Hatteras while sailing from Houston, Texas to Halifax, Nova Scotia. The first torpedo caused a fuel tank to catch fire, but it ultimately took 7 torpedoes to destroy the ship. One of the quickest Allied merchant ships to go down was the Carib Sea, a 260-foot-long cargo vessel that sank in under 3 minutes after being struck on its starboard side by 2 torpedoes. There are dozens of other Allied wrecks from this period scattering the floor of Torpedo Alley, and while the German casualties were much fewer, not all U-boats emerged from their destructive mission unscathed. In 2014, a submarine designated U-576 was discovered 30 miles off Cape Hatteras. Its commander, Hans-Dieter Heinecke, had started the journey back to Europe after the boat became damaged. He had very little success with destroying Allied ships during the month-long patrol, so when he crossed paths with a merchant convoy, he decided to make a last-ditch effort to inflict some damage. He managed to sink 1 freighter before U.S. forces swiftly took out the U-boat. U-576 was just one of several U-boats that came to rest in the graveyard of the Atlantic, serving as a sobering reminder of just how close the war came to U.S. shores. This unforgiving region continues to pose deadly hazards to modern-day ships. During Hurricane Sandy in 2012, a replica of the 3-masted HMS Bounty floundered in shallow 18-foot waves. In 2020, a 72-foot fishing vessel called the Ocean Pursuit ran aground on Bodie Island, where it's slowly being swallowed by the sand and is only surrounded by water at high tide. While new wrecks continue to appear throughout the graveyard of the Atlantic, old ones are still being discovered, adding to the seemingly never-ending list of losses that define this unique region.
6. The Shimizu Project. Tokyo's metropolitan area is one of the most congested and crowded areas in the world, with over 12 million residents. Every morning, an additional 2.5 million people come into the city from the suburbs. Because of this, there's no more space left for new buildings. There may be some unexpected real estate smack dab in the center of Tokyo Bay though, if a daring engineering concept by Japan's Shimizu Corporation comes to fruition. The Shimizu Pyramid, also known as the Mega City Pyramid, is a cutting-edge urban setting. It fits 20 buildings with 80 stories each into a 3-dimensional space. Altogether, it would have a massive footprint the size of 275 city blocks. More than $10 billion would be needed each year to rent out the same amount of land. The Great Pyramid of Egypt, which is made up of 55 smaller pyramids, each roughly the size of the Giza Pyramid, is proportional to the Shimizu Pyramid. The capacity would be 750,000 people. If constructed, the pyramid will consist of 5 trusses around the same size as the Great Pyramid at Giza, piled on top of one another. The final structure would be about 14 times taller though. This has the potential to be the biggest building ever created, but it would be so massive that no amount of material we have at the moment could support it. In the event that even one of the trusses failed, almost 1 million people would fall into the water. We'll have to wait and see if this vision ever becomes a reality. 5. Pacific Breeze. The Pacific Breeze tanker is the older sister to the Oceanic Breeze and was built by Kawasaki Heavy Industries, KHI. Pacific Breeze was the first vessel to be fitted with the tri-fuel diesel TFD propulsion system and is the biggest Moss-type liquid nitrogen gas or LNG carrier with a capacity of 182,000 meters cubed and an overall length of 948 feet. Unlike her sibling, the Pacific was time-chartered and delivered to CPC by IT Marine Transport Pte Ltd. The Ichthys LNG project's first cargo from Pacific Breeze was delivered to Taiwan back in October 2018. Ichthys LNG project, run by Impex, is the company's first, by world standards, large-scale project. At its peak, the project will likely generate over 100,000 barrels of material daily. The project shipments are handled by the K-Line Group. The initial liquid petroleum gas, or LPG, for the project was transported by Grace River, a large gas carrier VLGC from K Line. Condensate products will also eventually be transported by Aframax tankers run by a Singapore-based affiliate. What's the biggest ship you've ever been on? Tell us about it in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. 4. The Dancing House. On the Racine embankment in Prague is a remarkable structure called the Dancing House. It was built in 1996 by architects Frank Gehry, a Canadian-American, and Vlado Miluni, a Croatian Czech. The property was given the nickname Fred and Ginger after the legendary dancers Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers because of its unusual design, which is supposed to resemble a pair of dancers. The 9 above ground and 2 below ground levels of the building are occupied by offices, a 5-star hotel, and even a restaurant affectionately named Ginger and Fred. The US conducted a series of airstrikes on Prague in 1944 and 1945 during World War II, destroying a house that had once been where the Dancing House now stands. Young Václav Havel, a political rebel and writer, lived right next door. After the Velvet Revolution in 1989, he went on to become the president of the Czech Republic. When Havel was elected, he recruited the Croatian-Czech architect Miluni to carry out his vision of a cultural center. The Dancing House was built in the deconstructivist architectural style, a postmodern type of aesthetic that emphasizes a feeling of dissonance. Buildings with deconstructivism, often referred to as New Baroque, seemed deconstructed or unbalanced, asymmetrical, and fractured. But this is not how the phrase originally came to be. Rather, it is named after the movement's uprising against the Russian constructivist movement. Deconstructivist architecture disobeys the conventional architectural principles most abide by doing away with balance, orderly forms, and any predictable textures. A non-linear pattern of windows are seen scattered around the building's concrete exterior. Every window has a strange frame that sticks out from the surface of the property, giving the site a three-dimensional appearance. One of the building's central pillars is made of glass and steel, while the other is concrete. In addition, 99 concrete plates in a variety of sizes were built to sustain the pillar's odd design. Additionally, a Medusa-shaped structure of wire mesh and twisted tubing is positioned above the building. 3. Longaberger Basket Building. In 1976, Dave Longaberger opened a small, modest business in Dresden, Ohio, and started making baskets similar to those his father had created in a nearby factory during the Great Depression. The demand and appreciation for these baskets grew, resulting in Longaberger building a home office in 1995. And then the basket building was born. It was constructed as the Longaberger Basket Company's 7-story corporate headquarters. The building is a 160 times bigger version of the medium market basket Longaberger usually made. The bottom is 192 feet long and 126 feet wide, while the roofline is nearly 208 feet long and 142 feet wide. It's truly a sight to see. In addition to capitalizing on the market for hand-woven party baskets, Dave also came up with the concept of managing his company from within. When the proposal was unveiled, the majority of his staff, who were less enthusiastic than their leader, didn't take Dave's idea seriously. It's possible that they thought the house-sized basket represented the immense physical edge of basket-making technology. On December 17, 1997, they moved into their new office, a Brobdingnagian picnic packer in Newark, to the shock of many. Longaberger had spent nearly $30 million on its construction. After the party basket fad peaked and died down, the facility they were made in was finally abandoned. It was sold to a local developer in late 2017, who declared that in late 2019, the basket would be remodeled and transformed into a lavish hotel. Thanks to the Longabergers, the entire area around Newark continues to be a basket-happy place. At their homestead in Fraserburg, the largest apple basket in the world is proudly displayed. It stands over 29 feet tall and was handmade in 1999 from maple hardwood. The addition of enormous artificial apples has made it an even greater photo opportunity for tourists. 2. Doomsday Vault. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault sometimes referred to as the Doomsday Vault, is thought to be humanity's last line of defense against extinction. Its purpose is to preserve the world's seeds. The inventor of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault is Gary Fowler, a scientist, environmentalist, and big supporter of biodiversity. Despite the fact that there are over 1,700 gene banks worldwide that store seeds, they're all susceptible to some kind of conflict or disaster. Fowler first thought of a backup seed repository in 2003, where every seed in existence could be kept as secure as possible. The vault, dug over 500 feet into the side of a mountain, was built in 2008 thanks to Fowler's inspiration. Withdrawals from the seed vault began in 2015 thanks to the Syrian war. The seeds were put in a gene bank where genetic material is kept close to the Syrian city of Aleppo, which was devastated by conflict. Seeds on Ice, Svalbard, and the Global Seed Vault is a book on the vault written by Fowler and published in 2016. Svalbard is situated in an Arctic Ocean archipelago made up of several islands of the Norwegian nation. Svalbard is halfway between continental Norway and the North Pole, north of Europe's mainland. The location is also placed in a low humidity environment that is geologically stable and high enough to avoid flooding. It is extremely remote and is the northernmost point commercial airlines fly. Due to their placement, the seeds will stay cold even if the electricity or refrigeration fails. The seeds are packaged in 3-ply foil packets, which are then sealed within boxes to maintain the temperature. These boxes are positioned on shelves within the vault to carefully monitor for temperature and moisture levels. The seeds can survive so long because of this mechanism, which lowers their metabolic activity. They are not intended for average farmers or gardeners to use. They're valuable and useful as a genetic resource in plant breeding. As a result, the seeds are used to benefit scientists and plant breeders involved in the development of new crop varieties. Consider the seeds as a collection of qualities, or to put it more broadly, future crop alternatives, protecting against disease and insect resistance, heat and drought tolerance, as well as improved nutrition. The vault and others across the world are used to store historical plant species. According to National Geographic, the United States' historic fruit and vegetable types have reportedly been eradicated by nearly 90%. These seeds can be safeguarded for future generations in the seed vault. But the Global Seed Vault is expressly designed to help other banks in particular. It is designed to hold an astounding 4.5 million different kinds of crops, each of which has about 500 seeds. According to the Global Crop Diversity Trust, an international organization that collaborates with the Norwegian government to maintain the vault, a maximum of 2.5 billion seeds can be kept in it. The vault has more than 860,000 current seed samples and a huge diversity, since these were contributed by practically every nation on the globe. There are certain guidelines for donations and seed retrieval at Svalbard. First, they only accept gifts that are from a member of the multilateral system, a global agreement on food resources, or seeds that were grown securely in the gifter's home country. The multilateral system is a part of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture that controls the sharing of plant genetics between countries. Through seed banks, the pact guarantees that nations can freely exchange the genetic data of 64 specific crops that make up about 80% of all human consumption. 1. $500 billion desert dream. Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, wants dinosaurs to play a role in our future. The Wall Street Journal published plans for a $500 billion megacity called Neom back in July 2019. Neom will cover about 9,652 square miles of dry terrain in northwest Saudi Arabia. The 2,300-page document from the plan reveals some of the most absurd and perplexing ideas we've ever seen. The plan's strangest concepts, which were developed in collaboration with multiple US-based consultants, have sparked a rush of mocking and confused responses from social media. Neom's designs picture flying taxis for commuting and robots that can clean, cook, and engage in head-to-head battles with other robots for people's amusement. In addition to a park full of mechanical dinosaurs, there would also be an artificial moon, a beach with glow-in-the-dark sand, and more entertainment amenities. The strategy calls for using cloud seeding technologies to encourage rain in order to alleviate the severe desert heat. The more bizarre elements of the initiative have been made fun of all over online. This is because Bin Salman has been accused of employing expensive technology to hide countless human rights violations. According to Wall Street Journal, over 20,000 people who have lived in the area for generations would have to be forcibly removed in order for Neom to be built near Jordan's borders, with a bridge spanning across the Red Sea and into Egypt. Bin Salman became the mastermind behind Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, a plan to modernize and wean the country off its heavy reliance on oil. According to the plan, the government would achieve this objective by selling off many public assets, investing the proceeds, and generating money via new sources other than crude oil. Even though the Oz of the Middle East is still being built and considered, there's already a push to bring in international talent from a variety of sectors, including tourism, technology, and entertainment. Additionally, it seems that there's a lot of money available to entice the wealthy, as some sources claim Neom is paying its top executives about $1.1 million annually. Those who do take the plunge will be committing to a future without roads or vehicles, just flying taxis and a high-speed train. Then there are holograms and artificial avatars that will permeate throughout daily life. Each region will, according to the planners, be entirely powered by renewable energy sources, sustainably connected and surrounded by restored and rewilded nature. With almost 40% of the world's population within a 6-hour flight and its favorable location by the Red Sea, through which roughly 13% of the world's trade passes through, Neom is positioned to possibly become a gateway for international trade. The recently opened Neom Media Village and Bajda Desert Studios, which together encompass the nation's largest and greatest sound stages and production support facilities, demonstrate Neom's lofty intentions for art and culture, in addition to its efforts to entice hardcore commercial investment. Another big objective of the Vision 2030 plan is to modernize and expand the nation's media sector. Do you think Neom is a good idea? Thanks for watching. Which one of these enormous projects shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye.